Welcome to your online lecture for Chapter 5. This is part 1 of 2 parts. Here we'll talk about the historical world and a little bit of the literary world of Joshua chapters 1 to 12 and Judges chapters 1 and 2. The Pentateuch, or the first 5 books of the Bible, ends with a promise to the ancestors unfulfilled. Delivered by the Lord from Egypt, they stand at the border of the promised land, though it is not yet theirs. In this section, we hear the story of the people of Israel from their entry into the promised land to their exile from that land. The stories in this section of the Bible span about 700 years, between 1250 BCE and 587 BCE, the time of the Babylonian exile. A theme to keep in mind in this section is obedience to the Lord leads to blessing, and disobedience leads to disaster for the nation and for individuals. As we consider some of the stories in these 2 books, you'll notice this theme reoccur in different ways. From a literary perspective, Joshua chapters 1 to 12 and Judges chapter 1 and 2 balance each other. Instead of contradicting each other, they reflect a complementary patterning, which we've seen in Genesis chapter 1 and 2. Joshua chapters 1 to 12 is a pattern description of the taking of the land just as God intended. Judges chapter 1 to chapter 2 verse 5 is a less idealized, less ordered account. The first set of discussion questions invites you to look how God is portrayed in any one passage in Joshua chapters 1 to 12 and Judges chapter 1 and 2. It asks you, are you troubled by the portrayal of God there? Why or why not? And finally, why do you think God was portrayed in such a manner? From a historical perspective, one can't help but ask, did the stories in Joshua and Judges actually happen? Were they true? There are 3 major hypotheses put forward by biblical historians to explain the emergence of Israel in Canaan. The first being the Blitzkrieg model, the second, peaceful infiltration, and finally, peasant revolt. Your textbook goes into detail explaining each of these major hypotheses. I invite you to read carefully through them. I invite you to consider which of the 3 major hypotheses you would support. At the end, the textbook authors take the position that it was a complicated process not to be explained by any one single model. They base this argument on evidence from the text itself. These are examples of narrative honesty, and in your textbook on page 101, there's an explanation of that. So what can historians say about the historicity of Joshua and Judges? Well, the Exodus group, likely a diverse group, crossed the Jordan circa 1250 BCE. They met a varied reception as they migrated toward the central highlands. Some of those they encountered claimed kinship, and some adopted fidelity to the Lord. However, never did they decisively dominate the Canaanites. No judge was the national leader. Most led a single tribe or a coalition of them. The indigenous urbanized population continued to control the great walled cities. The balance of power persisted between the indigenous urbanites and the new migrants from 1250 until about 1100 BCE. This was because the Canaanites were not suited to guerrilla warfare. The geography of Israel has many valleys and gullies, places to hide in which the new migrants could defend themselves from an urbanized army. However, at some point, an imbalance occurred. The Battle of Jericho, found in Joshua chapter 6, verses 1 to 27, is the most celebrated victory of Joshua. Anthropologically, what we see in Judges is a loose tribal association based on kinship and loyalty to the Lord. In tribal culture, charismatic leadership is common. We see this in the Judges as they galvanize people amid crisis. The quick and decisive ambush tactics of the Judges is consistent with tribal societies. Tribal society, as we know, is generally egalitarian. It is believed that the fundamental traditions of the Torah were laid down in this period. This will be in tension with values of a more stratified society which we'll encounter in the Kings. Most of the rest of Judges, chapter 2 to 16, is a collection of legends about heroes among the tribes who demonstrated their leadership by delivering people from oppression at times of crisis. The legends follow a pattern. The people turn from the Lord and serve their gods. Next, the Lord becomes angry and allows them to be oppressed. Third, the Lord raised up judges to deliver them. And finally, when the judge died, the people turned again to evil, and the cycle begins again. For your last discussion question, you're invited to select one story or character. You're invited to read through the paragraph summary provided there and refer to the scripture passage in answering the following. What meaning, if any, do you find in the narrative? The story of Ehud, which is summarized in your textbook, is worth the read.